Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. In 1997, a teenage girl walked into room 6 of a rural roadside motel in Kansas. By morning, the room was empty. Her belongings remained, the bed was unmade, the TV still warm. But she, and every trace of her, was gone. 25 years later, another traveler vanishes from the very same room under nearly identical circumstances. Locals whisper the motel is cursed. Detectives suspect a far more human predator. But as more disappearances link back to room 6, the line between crime and legend blurs. The rain had already started by the time Margaret Weller pulled her car into the cracked parking lot of the Sleepy Pines Motel. It was late summer, 1997, and the storm clouds over the flat Kansas horizon rolled in with the kind of heaviness that seemed to smother the last flickers of daylight. The motel's neon sign, buzzing and dim, blinked a half-hearted vacancy in red. Margaret had worked the night shift at the motel for years. She knew its quirks. The way the soda machine outside room 4 always ate quarters, the way the pool, long drained, smelled faintly of mildew, and the way the 6 on room X's door always hung slightly askew no matter how many times it was fixed. She was there the night the first girl disappeared. The check-in. It was just after 9 p.m. when the teenager appeared in the lobby. She was carrying a duffel bag that looked far too heavy for her thin frame. Her hair, damp from the rain, stuck to her face. Margaret remembered her eyes most of all, wide, cautious, but with a strange determination that made Margaret pause. "Checking in?" Margaret asked, trying to sound warm. The girl nodded. She handed over a driver's license and a crumpled 20. The ID said her name was Lacey Holt, 17 years old, from Topeka. Margaret hesitated. 17 wasn't old enough to rent a room, not legally. But she'd seen runaways before. Lacey had that look about her. "You sure you're all right, honey?" Margaret asked. "I just need a place for the night," Lacey said quickly, almost rehearsed. Against her better judgment, Margaret slid the key for room 6 across the counter. She never knew exactly why she did. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe she didn't want to send a girl like that back out into the storm. The last sighting. Guests came and went that night, mostly truckers stopping off the highway. Margaret remembered watching Lacey walk down the row of doors to room 6, her duffel slung low. She paused for a second, glancing back as though she expected someone to be watching. Then she vanished inside. That was the last time anyone could say for sure they saw her. Later, another guest swore he saw movement in the blinds around midnight, like someone pacing. Another claimed he heard muffled voices, maybe a man's. But no one could ever confirm. The empty room. The next morning, housekeeper Gloria Alvarez pushed her cart down the row of rooms. She knocked on room 6. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She let herself in with the spare key. The first thing she noticed was the bed. The blanket was pulled halfway down, sheets rumpled, as though someone had left in a hurry. The TV was still on, buzzing with static from an empty channel. A duffel bag sat in the corner, zipped halfway. Inside were folded clothes, a hairbrush, a notebook with doodles in the margins. But no Lacey. Gloria checked the bathroom. Toothbrush still on the counter. Shower curtain half drawn. Damp towel on the floor. It looked like someone had stepped out for a moment and never returned. She called the front desk. Margaret came rushing in. Together, they searched the room again, growing more unsettled by the second. There was no sign of struggle. No blood. No broken glass. Just absence, sharp and cold. By noon, the local sheriff's office had arrived. The investigation begins. Deputy Carl Brennan stood in room 6 with his notebook, frowning. "So she checked in last night and now she's gone?" "That's right," Margaret said, wringing her hands. "Her things are still here. Who just leaves their bag like that?" Brennan flipped through the notebook found in the duffel. The handwriting was loopy, erratic, like the thoughts of someone restless. At the top of one page, written over and over, were the words, "Don't let him find me." Brennan's brow furrowed. Who's him? That became the first of many unanswered questions. They canvassed the motel. A trucker said he saw a dark sedan parked at the far end of the lot around midnight. Another swore he saw a man smoking near the ice machine. None of it led anywhere concrete. A room with a reputation. As the hours turned into days, the motel fell under a cloud. People began whispering about room 6. It's bad luck, one housekeeper muttered. Always has been. Margaret thought back and realized it wasn't the first strange thing tied to that room. Guests had complained before. Odd noises at night, flickering lights, the sense of being watched. Once, a woman had checked out early, insisting she saw someone standing at the foot of her bed. But now, with Lacey gone, the stories multiplied. Some said she'd been taken. Others whispered that room 6 took her. The missing report. Lacey Holt was reported missing the next day by her foster mother in Topeka. She had run away before, but this time felt different. Her ID, her clothes, even her sketchbook, all abandoned. For weeks, deputies searched fields, ditches, truck stops. They found nothing. Room 6 was scrubbed clean and rented again. But Margaret always hesitated before handing over its key. She'd look at that crooked number 6 and feel a chill, remembering the girl with the rain-soaked hair who had looked back one last time before disappearing forever. Years later, time dulled the memory, but never erased it. Then, 25 years later, in 2022, another disappearance would happen in the very same room. Same signs. Same silence. Same hollow absence. And when detectives reopened the case, they would find that what happened to Lacey Holt wasn't just an isolated mystery. It was part of a pattern. A thread leading through decades of vanished travelers, all tied to motels just like Sleepy Pines. The room hadn't forgotten. And it wasn't done claiming lives. The name Lacey Holt became the headline on every local paper for weeks after her disappearance, but to those who knew her, she was more than just another runaway-turned-statistic. She was complicated, restless, and, as investigators soon learned, carrying secrets bigger than anyone expected. The life she left behind. Lacey had been in foster care for nearly 5 years by the summer of 1997. Her biological mother struggled with addiction and drifted in and out of rehab facilities, while her father had long since vanished from her life. She was placed with the Websters, a middle-aged couple in Topeka known for taking in troubled teens. She was difficult, foster mother Denise Webster admitted in an interview. Not bad, just restless. Like she was always waiting for the next place, the next thing. Teachers described her as bright but distracted, prone to doodling dark sketches in the margins of her notebooks. Faces with empty eyes, staircases leading to nowhere, rooms filled with shadows. Her best friend, April Kincaid, remembered how Lacey always carried her battered sketchbook everywhere she went, even on nights when they snuck out to the 7-Eleven for soda. She said it helped her remember things, April recalled. I never knew what she meant by that. The last days before she vanished, detectives pieced together the timeline. On the morning of August 14, 1997, Lacey told her foster parents she was heading to summer classes. Instead, she skipped school and boarded a bus heading west. Surveillance cameras, grainy black and white feeds at gas stations, captured her at least twice along the route, wearing the same denim jacket and carrying that same overstuffed duffel. Why she chose the Sleepy Pines Motel remained a mystery. It wasn't on the way to anywhere significant. Just a highway stopover, the kind of place designed for truckers and traveling salesmen. When pressed, April revealed something chilling. She told me a few days before she left that she wasn't safe at home. That someone was coming for her. I thought she was being dramatic, but now. Investigators leaned heavily on that statement. If Lacey believed someone was following her, the note in her sketchbook, "Don't let him find me," suddenly took on a much darker meaning. The conflicting witnesses. Part of what made the case so confounding were the inconsistencies. Margaret, the night clerk, insisted Lacey checked in alone. She was certain of it. But another guest, a trucker named Dennis "Red" Callahan, swore he saw her arguing with a man in the parking lot just after check-in. She was small, young, and he was in her face. I didn't want to get involved, but I remember it, Red told deputies. Yet no one else backed up his claim. Other guests said they saw no one with her. And then came the third account. A couple in room 7 reported hearing voices through the thin walls around midnight. At least two, they said. A girl's voice and a man's. But again, no one could confirm. The more deputies interviewed people, the less clear the truth became. The notebook found in Lacey's duffel became central to the investigation. Pages filled with sketches, shadowed faces, a recurring drawing of a locked door, and one disturbing image of a motel room with the number 6 written in the corner. That drawing sent shivers through Margaret when she saw it. It was this room, she whispered to deputies. Had Lacey been there before? Or was she simply imagining it? In the back of the notebook, scrawled in messy handwriting, were fragments of thoughts. He follows me even when I sleep. The man with the lighter won't stop watching. Don't open the door if he knocks. Investigators debated endlessly who was. An abusive boyfriend? Her estranged father? A foster parent? Or a stranger she met on the road? Digging into her past. As with many missing person cases, detectives turned first to family. Her biological mother, still in and out of rehab, claimed she hadn't seen Lacey in years. Her father, when tracked down in Missouri, denied any involvement and seemed almost indifferent. She was never mine to raise, he said coldly. The Websters, her foster parents, insisted they loved her, though they admitted she often fought with her foster father, Rick. He was strict, Denise said, but only because he wanted structure for her. Rumors swirled anyway. Some in Topeka whispered that Rick had a temper. Others suggested Lacey might have been trying to escape him when she ran. Detectives pressed, but no evidence ever tied him to the disappearance. He was at work the night she vanished, and co-workers confirmed it. Still, suspicion lingered. A stranger in the shadows. What kept resurfacing was the story of the dark sedan. Multiple witnesses, Red the trucker, Gloria the housekeeper, and even Margaret herself, remembered a car parked near the end of the lot late that night. They described it as an older model, maybe a Ford or a Chevy, black or dark blue. Headlights were off, Gloria recalled. But I swear I saw smoke from someone's cigarette. By the time deputies canvassed the area, the car was gone. No plates, no driver identified. Just another shadow in a case full of them. The town reacts. In a small Kansas town, the disappearance became legend almost overnight. The Sleepy Pines Motel, already shabby and half-empty most nights, earned a reputation. Families avoided it. Truckers swapped stories of the haunted room. Kids dared each other to sneak up to room 6 at night and knock on the door. Some swore they heard whispers. Others claimed the lights flickered when no one was inside. For the sheriff's office, the gossip made the investigation harder. Real leads got buried under ghost stories. But for Margaret, who still worked the front desk, it became personal. Every time she handed over the key to room 6, she hesitated. She'd picture Lacey's face, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes too old for her age. I should have stopped her, Margaret confessed years later. I should have called someone. The unsettling discovery. 3 weeks after the disappearance, a deputy searching the wooded area behind the motel found something strange, a small, silver keychain shaped like a star. April later confirmed it belonged to Lacey. She'd had it since junior high. But there was no trace of Lacey herself. No body, no clothes, no footprints. Just that keychain lying in the dirt as though deliberately dropped. Years of silence. As summer turned to fall, then winter, the case went cold. Leads dried up. Witnesses moved away. The Sleepy Pines Motel eventually closed down one wing of its rooms. Still, Margaret stayed. Someone had to keep watch, she told herself. For Lacey's foster family, the not knowing was the cruelest part. Denise Webster kept Lacey's room untouched for years, her sketchbook replicas taped to the walls like a shrine. April, her best friend, left Kansas as soon as she turned 18, unable to stand the silence. But every so often, someone driving through town would stop at the diner and ask, "Is that the place where the girl disappeared? The one from room 6? A pattern waiting to be found. What no one realized in 1997 was that Lacey wasn't the last. Over the years, Travelers vanished from small, roadside motels across the Midwest. Always women, always young, always with no sign of struggle. At first, no one connected the dots. But when it happened again at Sleepy Pines 25 years later, in the same room, with the same eerie circumstances, detectives would reopen the files and notice the shadows trailing backward. The mystery of who Lacey was, and why she ran, was about to collide with something much larger. The truth about Room 6 was still hidden, waiting to surface. The Sleepy Pines Motel had always been a place people passed through, not a place they stayed. Long before the name Room 6 became a whisper of dread, the motel carried a reputation that locals rarely put into words. For detectives reopening the case decades later, it became clear that the disappearance of Lacey Holt was not the motel's first brush with darkness. The birth of Sleepy Pines. The motel was built in 1962 by a man named Howard Howie Pike, a Korean War veteran with a knack for real estate but a taste for corner cutting. He bought 5 acres of scrubby land off Highway 24 and put up 12 identical rooms. Flat-roofed, cinder-block walls, thin carpets, and paint that peeled almost as soon as it dried. Nothing fancy, a newspaper article from the time noted. But it's cheap and the highway needs stopovers. It was the kind of place that thrived on truckers, traveling salesmen, and families on tight budgets. By the late 60s, however, business had already started to dip. Larger chain motels were popping up closer to Topeka. That was when the first accident happened. The drowning in Room 6. In July 1965, a salesman named Richard Grant was found dead in the bathtub of Room 6. His body had been discovered by housekeeping when he failed to check out. Police ruled it an accidental drowning, citing alcohol in his system. But the coroner's report noted something odd. Grant's knuckles were bloodied, as though he had been pounding on something before he died. The motel never advertised the death, but locals heard. They always heard. The woman who screamed. The second incident came in 1971. A young mother traveling with her toddler checked into Room 6. Guests reported hearing screams in the middle of the night, followed by silence. When staff rushed in the next morning, they found the toddler asleep in the bed, but the mother was gone. Her purse was still in the room, along with her car parked out front. Police scoured the area but never found her. The child was placed in state custody. The room was cleaned, painted, and rented again. But the reputation began to take root. A reputation among locals. By the late 70s, townsfolk avoided the motel entirely. Truckers still used it, but locals whispered about the cursed room. An older resident, interviewed years later, said, "My cousin stayed there once. He told me he woke up in Room 6 and there was a man standing by the door. Just standing there, watching. When he turned on the light, nobody was there." Margaret, who started working at the front desk in the early 80s, remembered guests checking out early, shaking their heads, saying they couldn't sleep. They'd say it felt like the room was listening, she told investigators. The ledger. One of the more chilling discoveries came years later, when detectives reopened the files. Inside an old storage closet at the motel, behind a stack of yellowed receipts, they found a guest ledger dating back to 1964. The pages were filled with names and room numbers, neat and tidy. But room access entries carried strange notes beside them. Checked out early. Didn't leave key. Noise complaint. Missing item reported. And occasionally the cryptic word, void. No one could explain who wrote those notes or what void meant. The staff who stayed quiet. Several longtime employees admitted later they always felt uneasy about Room 6. Gloria Alvarez, the housekeeper, confessed she often rushed through cleaning that room, never lingering. "I'd get these chills," she said, "like someone was behind me. Once, I swear I heard whispering in the bathroom, but when I opened the door it was empty." Another clerk who worked nights in the 80s recalled a night when the room's TV kept turning on by itself, though no one was checked in. "It wasn't ghosts," he said firmly. "Someone was messing with us. Someone who knew that place better than we did." The drifter. Rumors also surrounded a handyman named Walt Hensley, who worked off and on at the motel in the late 70s. Walt was a drifter, in and out of jail for theft, a man who never stayed in one place long. Locals said he was obsessed with the motel's layout, constantly tinkering with locks and peering into crawl spaces above the rooms. When pressed years later, one former employee swore Walt kept a personal key to room 6 even after he stopped working there. "He said it was his," she whispered, "like the room belonged to him." The police files. Detectives combing through archives in the 2000s found dozens of incident reports tied to Sleepy Pines. Most were minor: domestic disputes, drunk guests, stolen property. But room 6 popped up again and again. 1982. A couple reported hearing footsteps pacing all night above their ceiling, though the motel had no second floor. 1989. A teenage hitchhiker went missing after last being seen entering room 6 with a man described only as tall, wearing a cap. 1993. A fire broke out in the bathroom of room 6, though no cause was ever determined. Each time, the case was closed quietly. The motel wasn't high priority. People assumed it was a magnet for bad luck, nothing more. The wall. The most unsettling discovery didn't happen until 2003, when the motel underwent minor renovations. Workers tearing out old paneling in room 6 uncovered something hidden inside the wall cavity: a cluster of cigarette butts, dozens of them arranged in a neat pile. They were old, yellowed, some stained with lipstick. No one could explain how they got there. But what? The place that doesn't forget. By the time Lacey Holt vanished in 1997, the motel was already steeped in rumor and unease. For investigators reopening the case in 2022, the pattern was chilling: deaths, disappearances, strange reports, all circling back to one room. Detective Sarah Langley, who led the reopened inquiry, put it bluntly in her notes. Room 6 is not just a crime scene. It's a stage that's been used again and again. But the question was, by whom? Theories. Over the years, theories multiplied. Some believed the room was simply cursed, a place where bad energy pooled. Others suspected the motel's original owner, Howie Pike, or the drifter handyman Walt Hensley. A few whispered about truckers, predators who used motels as hunting grounds. But one theory stood out: that someone had been using hidden spaces in the motel, crawl spaces, service shafts, maybe even secret passages, to enter and exit room 6 unnoticed. It would explain the voices, the footsteps, the vanishing, and it would mean Lacey hadn't just walked away that night. Someone had been waiting for her. Setting the stage for 2022. When detectives in 2022 revisited the old motel records, they saw the same chilling notes repeating through decades: missing guests, unexplained noises, shadowy figures. It was no longer about superstition. Room 6 was tied to a predator, one who may have been using it for decades, hiding in plain sight, and who might still be out there. For the first time, the whispers of Sleepy Pines were no longer just ghost stories. They were evidence. A motel frozen in time. By 2022, the Sleepy Pines Motel was a relic of another era. The neon sign, once bright red, now sputtered weakly, half its letters burned out. The gravel parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. The 12 rooms still stood in a neat row, their doors sun-faded and paint blistered. Most travelers bypassed it entirely, drawn instead to the glowing chain motels further down the highway. But for those short on money, or those seeking anonymity, the old place still had its uses. And so, on a humid July evening, a stranger checked in. The man at the desk. Margaret, now in her late 60s but still working the front desk part-time, noticed him right away. He was tall, dressed in a gray hoodie despite the heat, his face shadowed by a baseball cap. He slid a driver's license across the counter without a word. "Cash or card?" she asked. "Cash," he replied. His voice was low, almost a murmur. She gave him the key to room 6. Something about the way he took it, like it wasn't new to him, made her uneasy. But she said nothing. The first night. That night, other guests reported hearing faint noises through the walls. A couple in room 5 swore they heard humming, a slow, tuneless melody coming from the room next door. By morning, the man had not come out. His car, a dusty gray sedan with no plates on the front, was still parked in the lot. Curtains drawn. No sound. Margaret knocked on his door when housekeeping came by, but he didn't answer. Do Not Disturb was hung on the knob. She let it be. But the humming continued. The waitress. On the second night, the man finally emerged. He walked to a nearby diner, the Highway 24 Grill, where a young waitress named Ellie served him. She noticed his hands first, scarred, rough, like someone who worked with tools. He ordered coffee, black, and sat in the corner for 2 hours. Barely touched his food. When she tried small talk, he only smiled faintly and asked, "Do you believe places can remember?" She laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But his eyes didn't move from hers. The cameras. Around the same time, Detective Sarah Langley was digging into old case files. She had reopened the disappearance of Lacey Holt, the girl who vanished from room 6 back in 1997. Sarah had always been drawn to cold cases, especially ones with threads left hanging. And this motel was full of them. When she learned that room 6 had just been rented again, something clicked in her gut. She arranged for a local patrol officer to drive by and discreetly place a small surveillance camera across the lot. For the first time in years, room 6 would be watched. The strange movements. The footage from the first night showed nothing unusual. The man checked in, carried a duffel bag inside, shut the door. But on the second night, the camera caught something odd. At 2:13 a.m., the curtains twitched. A shadow moved across the window. Then, at 2:15, another figure appeared, faint, pale, almost indistinguishable. Detective Langley replayed the footage again and again. "Could be a trick of the light," the tech officer said. But Sarah shook her head. Or it could be someone else in there with him. The housekeeper's discovery. On the third morning, Gloria Alvarez, who still cleaned the rooms occasionally, braved room 6 while the guest was gone. She opened the bathroom and froze. Inside the tub lay strands of long, blonde hair, fresh, not dusty or old. Gloria backed out quickly, shut the door, and told Margaret. When Margaret asked what she'd seen, Gloria just whispered, "It's happening again." The detective returns. That afternoon, Detective Langley drove out to the motel herself. She questioned Margaret and Gloria, then asked to look at the registry. The man had signed his name as Daniel Holt. Sarah felt her pulse spike. Holt. The same last name as the girl who disappeared in 1997. But Lacey had no known brother. No relative by that name. It could be coincidence. Or it could be deliberate. The voices at night. On the fourth night, guests in room 7 called the front desk in a panic. They swore they heard 2 people arguing inside room 6. One male voice, deep, controlled. The other, a female voice, muffled but desperate. When Margaret crept to the door to listen, the voices fell silent. She almost used her master key to open it. But something in her gut screamed at her not to. The Do Not Disturb sign was still swinging gently on the knob. The return of the choir. On the footage from that night, the humming grew louder. It wasn't a melody exactly, but a low, droning sound, like multiple voices layered over one another. Sarah's tech team enhanced the audio. What they heard chilled them. It wasn't just one man humming. It sounded like a choir, a link to the past. Sarah began piecing the timeline together. 1965, the salesman found drowned. 1971, the missing mother. 1989, the hitchhiker who vanished. 1997, Lacey Holt. And now, 2022, Daniel Holt, checked into the same room, humming in the dark. The question gnawed at her. Was Daniel part of a long chain of predators using room 6 as a stage? Or was he a relative, returning to the place where Lacey was taken? Either way, the pattern was repeating. And she knew if she didn't act soon, someone else would vanish. The motel manager's confession. That week, Margaret finally confessed something she'd never told police before. Back in 1997, the night Lacey vanished, she'd seen a man walking away from room 6. Not a guest. Not anyone she recognized. He had been carrying a bag. When asked why she hadn't spoken up, she said, "He looked like he belonged there. Like he was supposed to be part of the motel. I thought maybe he was a worker." But there were no workers that night. And when Sarah showed her the surveillance still of Daniel Holt, Margaret went pale. "That's him," she whispered. The return. Room 6 had waited years for its next victim. Now, as July bled into August, the hum of voices grew louder. Guests continued to report shadows moving under their doors, footsteps pacing when no one was inside. And then, late one Friday night, a young woman checked into the motel alone. Her name was Emily Cross, 22, a student traveling home for the summer. Margaret handed her the key without thinking. She didn't realize which room she'd assigned until Emily walked away. Room 6. The trap is set. Detective Langley knew this was it, the cycle starting again. She ordered surveillance doubled. 2 unmarked cars waited down the highway. At 1:47 a.m., the footage showed Emily stepping into her room. Lights on. Curtains closed. At 2:10 a.m., Daniel Holt returned. He knocked once, softly, before unlocking the door with his own key. And the camera caught it. Emily never came out. For the first time in 50 years, police had eyes on Room 6 when the predator struck. But the real question wasn't whether they could catch him. It was whether they were prepared for what was inside that room. Because if the motel truly remembered as Daniel had said, then Room 6 wasn't just a backdrop. It was part of the crime itself. And it was waiting to be fed. Emily Cross was last seen alive at 1:47 a.m. on a grainy surveillance feed. She had walked into Room 6 carrying a backpack and a small suitcase. She flipped the light switch, closed the curtains, and vanished into the silence of the Sleepy Pines Motel. At 2:10 a.m., Daniel Holt returned, slipping quietly into the same room with a key he should not have had. From that moment forward, there was no footage of Emily leaving. By sunrise, her car still sat in the parking lot. Her door was closed. No one answered the knock of housekeeping. It was as if she'd been swallowed whole by the room. The first alarm. Margaret was the first to notice something wrong. She'd seen Emily check in, smiling politely, asking about vending machines. Normal. Harmless. But now her car hadn't moved, and the room was locked from the inside. She phoned Detective Sarah Langley. "She's gone," Margaret whispered. Sarah arrived within 20 minutes. The highway sun was just breaking, the motel glowing weakly under it. She saw Emily's little hatchback in the lot. The windows fogged from the night's humidity. "Call it in," she told her sergeant. "We're treating this as an abduction." The locked door. At 8:30 a.m., police unlocked Room 6 with Margaret's master key. The room was empty. The bed looked untouched. Emily's suitcase sat neatly against the wall. Her backpack was zipped, her phone inside, still charging on the nightstand. The bathroom was clean. The towels folded. No signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry. The only thing out of place was the humming. Detectives stood still, listening. It was faint, coming from somewhere inside the walls, a low, layered drone, like a chorus humming without words. The phantom entry. The surveillance footage was replayed again and again. Emily in. Holton after. But no one out. How the hell did they leave? Officer Graves muttered. "They didn't," Sarah said. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor. "Not through the door, anyway." She asked the tech team to scan the feed frame by frame. On the 4th pass, they spotted something. The curtain in Emily's room fluttered, even though the window never opened. It was as if the air itself shifted. Emily's family. By afternoon, Emily's parents had arrived from 2 towns over. Linda Cross, her mother, clutched a photo of her daughter at graduation. "She was supposed to come home last night," Linda cried. "She called me from the road. She said she'd stop somewhere cheap, then finish the drive today. She promised." Her father stood silently beside her, jaw tight, eyes burning. Sarah promised them everything was being done. But in her gut, she knew the motel was eating its way through another family. The press descends. By evening, news vans swarmed the gravel lot. A local girl gone missing at a haunted motel was irresistible to the media. Reporters shouted questions at Margaret, at officers, at anyone who passed. Is this connected to the old disappearances? Why was she checked into Room 6? Who is Daniel Holt? Sarah gave a brief statement. "We have a person of interest. We are pursuing all leads. We ask the public to come forward with any information." But she left out the strangest part, that the room was spotless, untouched, and humming. The motel's secret. That night, Gloria Alvarez, the longtime housekeeper, came forward. She asked to speak with Sarah privately. Gloria confessed something she'd never told anyone. "There's a crawl space," she whispered, "behind the rooms. For pipes and wires. It runs the whole length of the motel. Nobody ever goes back there. It's too tight, too dangerous." Sarah stared at her. "You're saying someone could move between rooms?" Gloria nodded. "That's why I quit cleaning full-time. I used to hear things in there. Footsteps, voices. Once, I swear I saw an eye staring through a vent. Watching me." The crawlspace search. That night, a tactical team pried open the access hatch at the end of the building. The crawlspace smelled of mildew and rot. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling. Rat droppings littered the floor. But there were handprints on the walls. Dozens of them, pressed into the dust. Small, large, smeared, as if people had been crawling through there for decades. And on one section of wall, written in charcoal or soot, was a single sentence. "She never left." The DNA trail. Forensics swept room 6 and the crawlspace. From the tub, they pulled fresh hair samples. From the crawlspace, they scraped skin cells from the nails stuck in the wood. By morning, the lab called back. "The hair is Emily's," the technician said. "But the blood we found, it isn't hers. And it isn't new." Sarah's stomach sank. "Whose is it?" The reply came after a pause. "Lacey Holt. The girl who vanished in 1997. Daniel Holt." Sarah drove 3 hours to the last known address listed on Daniel Holt's license. It was a small farmhouse, abandoned, windows smashed. Neighbors said no one had lived there in years. But in the barn out back, Sarah found something. A wall covered with newspaper clippings, all the motel disappearances, spanning 50 years. Each pinned carefully, marked with dates. And in the center, Emily's driver's license photo, taped up as if waiting. Below it, written in black marker. "The motel chooses." The motel at night. That evening, room 6 was sealed off with police tape. No one was allowed near it. Still, guests reported hearing knocking from inside. 3 short raps, then silence. A deputy swore he saw movement behind the curtain. When he unlocked the door, the room was empty. But the humming remained. Louder now. Like the walls themselves were singing. The revelation. Back at headquarters, Sarah pieced together the twisted puzzle. If the motel's crawlspace was used for abductions, someone had maintained it for decades. Maybe it was a cult, a family, or just one man passing down a legacy. But Daniel Holt, whoever he truly was, wasn't just another drifter. He was tied to Lacey Holt. Maybe her brother. Maybe her killer. Maybe both. And now, Emily Cross was trapped in the same cycle. The town turns. The disappearance shook the town like an earthquake. Some residents called for the motel to be demolished. Others insisted it was cursed and should never be touched. Local kids dared each other to sneak into the taped-off lot. An old priest came forward, claiming he'd once performed a blessing on the building after the 1971 case. But the walls resisted, he said. "It's not the people. It's the place." Sarah didn't believe in curses. But she believed in patterns. And the pattern was undeniable. Emily's phone. When forensics unlocked Emily's phone, they found a final note saved to her drafts at 2:08 a.m. It read only, "Someone's in my room." Then nothing. The motel breathes. 2 nights later, as rain battered the highway, Sarah stood outside room 6 with a flashlight. She swore she felt the door move under her hand. Like the wood itself was breathing. And when she pressed her ear to it, she heard something inside. Not humming this time. A voice. A woman's voice, faint and pleading. "Help me." The promise. The case of Emily Cross was no longer just a disappearance. It was a collision point, the past and present folding into each other inside room 6. Sarah made a silent vow that night. She would not let Emily vanish the way the others had. But the motel had been swallowing people for half a century. And it wasn't about to stop now. It was nearly midnight when Margaret Weller, now in her late 60s, heard the knock at her door. She lived in a modest 1-story home on the edge of town, her life quiet except for the lingering nightmares of sleepy pines. When she opened the door, she froze. An older man stood there. His face was hollow, eyes bloodshot, clothes worn thin. In his trembling hands, he clutched a weathered leather journal. "You don't know me," he rasped. "But I was the keeper." "Who was the keeper?" The man's name was Earl Winslow, once the head groundskeeper at the Sleepy Pines Motel back in the late 1970s. For decades, he had disappeared from public life, living in a shack miles off the highway. Most assumed he was dead, but here he was, gaunt, shaking, haunted. "I can't carry it anymore," Earl whispered. "I can't die with this weight on me." He pressed the journal into Margaret's hands. "It's all in there. The walls. The tunnels. The way they used us." Sarah arrives. The next morning, Margaret called Detective Sarah Langley. "You'd better get over here," she said. "I think I have the missing piece." Sarah arrived to find Earl sitting at Margaret's kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee before him. His hands trembled so violently he could barely hold the cup. "You're the detective," Earl said, eyes glassy. "You want to know why the motel keeps taking him, don't you?" Sarah leaned forward. "Just tell me." The journal. The journal was a horror in itself. Yellowed pages filled with cramped handwriting smeared with dirt and sweat. It began in 1968, when Earl was just a handyman at Sleepy Pines. The owner, Mr. Klein, called me into his office one night. Said the motel had been built on bad soil, that we had to make adjustments. He showed me the crawlspace. Said it was more than just pipes. Said it was the motel's belly, and someone had to keep it fed. Sarah read the line twice. "Fed?" she asked. Earl nodded slowly. He believed the motel wanted something. Needed something. People. The ritual of the rooms. According to Earl's account, Mr. Klein, Sleepy Pine's original owner, was part of a secretive group of men who believed certain places had hungers. "The motel was one of them," Earl whispered. "They said room 6 was the mouth. That every so often, it demanded a soul." Sarah wanted to dismiss it as madness. But the pattern of vanishings was real. The history was real. "And you helped them?" she asked. Earl buried his face in his hands. "I was young. I did what I was told. At first, I just unlocked doors, moved bags, pretended not to see. Then, later, I started luring him." Earl's journal detailed specific cases, names that matched the missing persons from the files. He described slipping extra keys to men who shouldn't have had them. He wrote about leading young women to safe rooms, only for them never to be seen again. He admitted to building hidden panels, one-way vents, and false walls. And always, room 6 was at the center. Asterisk, "I could hear, sometimes," he wrote, "voices in the walls after they were gone. Whispers calling me a coward, begging to be let out. The motel kept them. The motel wanted them. I was just the gatekeeper." Margaret breaks down. Margaret slammed the journal shut. "My God, you're telling me all those years I worked there, when those girls disappeared, you knew? You let it happen?" Tears streamed down Earl's face. "I never wanted it. But once you start, you can't stop. They had me. The motel had me." Sarah's voice was sharp. "Who's they?" Earl's eyes flicked toward the window, as if someone might be listening. "The collectors. Men like Klein. Men with money. They didn't just feed the motel, they watched. They wanted to see fear. They wanted to hear it. The survivors." In one entry, Earl claimed there were survivors. Sometimes the motel didn't keep. Sometimes it back out. "Now hold up. Not right. I saw one once, months later, wandering the road barefoot, eyes empty. She didn't even remember her own name." Sarah's heart pounded. Could Emily still be alive somewhere inside that labyrinth of walls and crawlspaces? "Where did they take them?" she demanded. Earl's voice broke. "Inside. Deeper than the crawlspace. There are rooms you've never seen. Hidden rooms. Rooms with no doors. The confession." At last, Earl confessed his deepest sin. "The last one I lured was Lacey Holt," he said, trembling. "She was just a kid. Said she was running from someone. I thought, maybe if I gave her to the room it would stop. Maybe it would end. But it didn't." Sarah's chest tightened. "And Daniel Holt?" Earl shook his head. "I don't know who he really is. But he came years later, asking about her. He knew things only the motel could have told him. That's when I left. I couldn't face it anymore. The mark of the motel. Earl rolled up his sleeve. On his forearm was a scar, a jagged, burned brand in the shape of the number 6. They did this the night I became keeper, he whispered. Said it would bind me to the room. Sometimes it burns even now. Burns when the motel takes someone. Sarah stared at the scar, bow rising in her throat. Earl, she said slowly, is Emily still alive? His eyes filled with tears. If the room chose her, then maybe. For a little while. But not for long. Choice. Sarah closed the journal. Her mind was racing. On the one hand, this was the rambling of an old man riddled with guilt and madness. On the other, it was the missing link. The piece that explained the decades of vanishings, the hidden crawlspaces, the impossible locked room disappearances. But if what Earl said was true, Emily Cross was running out of time. You need to take me back there, Sarah said firmly. Earl recoiled. No. I swore I'd never set foot in that place again. Not after what it took from me. Then I'll go alone, Sarah replied. But if you want any kind of redemption, Earl, you'll come. The motel awakens. That night, they drove together to Sleepy Pines. Rain poured again, as if the sky itself remembered. The motel sat silent, cordoned off with yellow police tape. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a red glow on the wet pavement. Earl refused to step out of the car at first. His whole body shook. Then, as they stood before room 6, the humming began again. Louder than before. And Earl whispered, "It knows I'm here." Using Gloria's crawlspace access, Sarah and Earl slipped inside with flashlights. The air was thick, damp, almost suffocating. The tunnels stretched on, claustrophobic, lined with pipes that dripped rust. On one wall, fresh scratch marks ran deep into the wood. "Emily," Sarah breathed. Earl's flashlight flickered. "We're close." Then they heard it. A voice. With trembling. "Help, please." Sarah's blood ran cold. Emily was alive. The keeper's final words. They pressed deeper until they reached a false wall Earl had described. Behind it was a narrow chamber, dark, stinking of mold. But before Sarah could break through, Earl clutched his chest. His body convulsed. "Don't stop," he gasped. "Find her. Save her. End it." Sarah tried to steady him, but it was too late. Earl Winslow, the keeper, collapsed in the crawlspace, his final breath rattling in the dark. Sarah was left alone, the journal in her pack, the hum vibrating through her bones. And from beyond the wall, Emily's voice came again, faint and breaking. "Please, don't leave me here." The legacy of the keeper. Earl's confession had opened the door to the motel's darkest secrets. But with him dead, the weight now shifted to Sarah. The motel needed a keeper. And if she didn't end it, she feared it might choose her next. The storm had passed, but the motel grounds looked like a battlefield. Fallen branches littered the gravel lot, the neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering as if half dead, and puddles reflected the broken light. For Detective Hale, the silence that followed the storm was worse than the chaos of the night before. Room 6 stood at the center of it all, its door closed but humming with an invisible weight. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of mildew, old smoke, and something fouler, something that clung to the walls like rot. Hale paused at the threshold, the confession of Stanley Rourke, the motel's keeper, still echoing in his ears. Stanley hadn't told them everything. Hale knew it in his bones. The man's trembling words the night before had only scratched the surface. He opened the door, his flashlight beam cutting across the room. The bed was unmade, the thin mattress sagging in the middle as if someone had been lying there for years. The carpet, still damp from the storm, squelched beneath his boots. He aimed the beam toward the bathroom door, where the shadows seemed to bend unnaturally, as though trying to swallow the light. "Room 6 doesn't forget," Stanley had said. "It remembers everyone who checks in." Hale whispered the words under his breath. The keeper in the chair. Stanley Rourke sat in the station-holding cell, hunched over, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling. He looked less like a man and more like a husk, someone hollowed out by years of secrets. When Hale arrived to question him again, Stanley lifted his gaze with something like relief. "You went back in there, didn't you?" he rasped. "Yes," Hale said flatly. "And I think you left some things out of your story." Stanley gave a low, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Left out? Detective, I spared you. Room 6 doesn't like to be spoken of directly. Not for too long. It listens." Hale leaned forward. "What happened to Emily Cross? You confessed to hiding her body. But something doesn't add up. Why do you keep saying room 6 is the one that keeps her?" Stanley's lips trembled. He stared at Hale as though deciding whether to drag him further into the abyss or to let him stay blind. "You think I killed her?" he asked. "I think you know who did," Hale shot back. Stanley shook his head. "Not who. What?" "The Keeper's story." Stanley's voice lowered to a whisper as he leaned closer, his words meant for Hale alone. "I didn't build that motel, detective. I inherited it. My father kept it, and his father before him. It was always ours to watch over, but never ours to control. Room 6 was different even back then. Guests would check in and vanish. My grandfather used to say it was a hungry room. He said it picked its people, called them in." Hale tried to keep his expression steady, though a chill spread through his veins. Stanley went on. "My father told me the same when I was young. The room feeds, but it always gives something back." "What do you mean?" Hale pressed. Stanley's eyes darted toward the corner of the cell, as if shadows lingered there too. Some people saw visions. Some found money that wasn't theirs. Others heard voices of loved ones, people long dead. That's how it lures them. That's how it keeps them. "And Emily Cross?" Hale asked. Stanley swallowed hard. His voice broke when he spoke her name. She wasn't supposed to stay. She only wanted a night's rest. But the room wanted her. I tried to get her out. I did. But it was too late. She was already gone when I opened the door." "Gone how?" Hale demanded. Stanley's eyes watered. The bed was empty. Her things were still there, but she was gone. Like the room swallowed her whole. I didn't know what else to do. I told her family she checked out. I couldn't let anyone know." Hale stared at him, disbelief and unease warring inside him. "And the body you buried in the woods? The one you confessed to?" Stanley's face twisted. "I never buried Emily. That body wasn't hers." Hale's doubt. The word struck Hale like a thunderclap. He had personally overseen the recovery of the remains in the pines. DNA testing was still pending, but everything, timing, circumstance, Stanley's original story, had pointed to Emily Cross. Then who the hell was it? Hale asked. Stanley only shook his head. The room doesn't just take. Sometimes it gives back. Pieces. Fragments. Things wearing faces that don't belong to them anymore. Hale slammed his hand against the cell bars. Enough riddles, Stanley. If you know where Emily Cross is, tell me. But Stanley only smiled weakly, his eyes sinking into shadow. Detective, you've already met her shadow. You just didn't recognize her. The return to room 6. That night Hale went back. Alone. The motel stood in silence, the neon sign sputtering weakly above him. He approached room 6 with his weapon drawn, though he knew it wouldn't help against whatever force Stanley believed in. Inside, the air was colder than before. The bedspread looked freshly smoothed as if awaiting a guest. A faint humming filled the air, soft, like someone whispering behind the walls. Hale gritted his teeth and stepped further in. Emily Cross, he said firmly, his voice echoing in the stillness. If you're here, I need you to show yourself. The light bulb flickered. A shadow darted across the bathroom mirror. Hale spun, but the room was empty. Then came the sound. A creak from the bed. The mattress sagged, as though someone invisible had sat down. Emily, Hale said again. No voice answered. But the mirror in the bathroom fogged over, as if someone unseen had breathed across it. Words scrawled themselves across the mist. Help me. Hale's chest tightened. He took a step forward, his pulse pounding in his ears. The message smeared itself, replaced by new words. Don't trust the keeper. The shadow. Behind him, the door creaked shut. Hale whirled, but no one stood there. Only the thin curtains swayed against the window, though the air was perfectly still. A figure began to form in the far corner of the room. Pale, indistinct, its features blurred like a photograph left too long in the sun. Hale froze. The shape tilted its head, watching him with eyes that weren't quite eyes. "Emily," he whispered. The figure stepped forward, and for a moment he saw her, the young woman from the missing posters, her hair falling around her shoulders, her eyes wide and desperate. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was Stanley's. "Leave while you can, detective. Room 6 doesn't like your questions." Hale staggered back, bile rising in his throat. The figure dissolved into shadow, the shape scattering into the walls until only the humming remained. He stumbled out of the room, gasping for air, his mind reeling. Stanley had confessed, yes, but the real story was far from finished. Emily Cross was still out there, in some form. And Room 6 wasn't just a place. It was a predator. As Hale drove away from the motel that night, the neon sign flickered again, then died completely. In the rearview mirror, the building seemed darker than before, almost invisible against the night. But on the road ahead, lit faintly by the glow of his headlights, stood a lone figure. A woman. She lifted her hands slowly, palm pressed toward him as though begging him to stop. And when the headlights washed over her face, Hale saw Emily Cross. Then, she vanished. Hale gripped the wheel tighter, his heart hammering. The keeper's shadow was everywhere, and the truth was still buried inside Room 6.